the game that they played against Kansas State earlier on in the season, right? I think TCU was down 11 points at halftime, was getting absolutely gashed on the ground. I think they had something like 4.8, 4.7 yards per carry before contact in the first half allowed, 4 explosive plays. So they definitely turned it around in the second half, but I think, the framework is in place for Kansas State to beat them.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Ben Brown of PFF. He is their head of betting innovation. Among other topics, we talk about his process for betting and how this includes things like PFF grades and a play-by-play simulator. We talk about college football championship week, including North Carolina versus Clemson and Kansas State versus TCU. And then we also talk about the NFL. And these games include Green Bay at Chicago and Kansas City at Cincinnati. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be 3 things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. In this newsletter, I write about college football and NFL bets that I made, and I also send out a curated list of tips and news every Saturday morning. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcast episodes and education through your ears. To sign up for my free sports betting email newsletter, go to thepowerrank.com. That's my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Ben Brown. He's the head of betting innovation at PFF. Ben, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Ed, thanks for having me. I definitely, have gotten the chance to chat a few times with you on, the Covering the Spread podcast, which you're on all the time. And it's great to be on this show. I definitely, tune in, every chance I get. And I've definitely enjoyed, your analytical approach to so many sports and being successful by them and your website as well. So this is definitely, a pleasure of mine to be a guest on your show.
Ben, I want to know a little bit more about your story. How did you get into football, analytics, and betting?
I maybe took like a little bit of a weird path, but I think it like kind of worked out. So I did, I would say grow up playing football or whatever, played, through 7th and 8th grade year into high school. I did play a couple years of lower level, like NAIA basically football as well. Did quit that basically like going into my junior year. So I only had 2 years kind of experience doing that, but I always loved football, loved the game, kind of wanted to, at least somewhat always be involved in one way or the other. And then like my background, specifically with football kind of fit in, I would say more so with this like betting perspective, because, outside of sports and everything else, my friend group in high school was very into, gambling card games, playing Texas Hold'em, those sorts of things. So this was kind of, I would say like the golden age of online poker, specifically back when, Chris Moneymaker was, running through the final table at the World Series of Poker and all these things. And that very much, as like a high school kid, was very much like a path that I found very, very enjoyable. And kind of like the analytics side of Texas Hold'em specifically was something that I, definitely gravitated towards, and like my friend group definitely gravitated towards. It kind of worked out. So once I finished high school, I very much became involved in like the online poker community, had some early success just because the games were, I would say very, very soft at that point in time, and then came across, a lot of other, gambling type avenues, right? Because there was just so much kind of being poured into this, offshore type, betting market, whether it was, playing blackjack, at certain websites to clear bonuses, or to, even like get involved with some of like the sports betting. So the way that my path kind of went from, poker to sports betting was I was, somewhat active, at least like as far as a lurker on the 2+2 poker forums, which were really big back in the day. and kind of a spot that I think helped me kind of hone not only my poker skill set, but also kind of laid the foundation for sports betting as well. So this was, closer to 2007, 2008. There was what I would say is like a really popular thread in their sports betting forum, specifically at 2plus2. This guy his screen name was Dolleman or whatever, and he had read Sharp Sports Betting by Stanford Wong, and was starting to basically kind of like track and recommend, certain Wong teasers through the 2007 and 2008 football season. And it was hitting at an insanely high clip. And this was back, when you could find, two team teasers at 6 points, basically, at like plus 100. And then they slowly started to trickle up like minus 105, minus 110, as people kind of started to gravitate towards those more and more. So that was kind of like my first almost aha moment of like, there are very much some exploitable and profitable edges when sports betting as well. And then just kind of tried to continue to develop that. And then, when Black Friday hit from an online poker perspective, I was kind of left, questioning what path to go down, right? Because obviously the gold rush of online poker had kind of, gone by the wayside in a lot of ways. You could obviously still play, but there wasn't nearly the same amount of people playing. It wasn't as easy. I didn't really enjoy playing like in a brick and mortar type setting as well, only focusing on like one table, 25 to 30 hands an hour or something like that when I was used to playing so much more. So I gravitated more towards like online betting approaches and stuff like that. And that's where, sports betting and DFS kind of hit at that point. And that was like early on 2010, 2011. And I had actually, I had kind of like a finance background going to college, but wasn't, doing really anything with that. So that was kind of like my first foray into even, like figuring out like analytics and working in, Excel and those sorts of things, and trying to understand what it took to actually like, build a model that could predict certain elements of, NFL games, I would say.
Excellent. So you're doing, you're building on all this. Like, were you still doing that on the side? Like, when did you end up going to PFF?
So I was, I graduated college. I took some time off, and this was actually when I graduated was also during the like the financial crash of 2008, 2009 or whatever. And I hadn't, and like because of poker or whatever, like I hadn't done, and this was probably like obviously a huge oversight on my part, but I hadn't done like any internships or anything. I didn't have like a summer job because I was playing so much poker. And so like
awesome.
So like I didn't really have, honestly, I didn't have like a ton of outs. Like I took off, a year after I graduated and kind of just played poker. It was like, an agreement I had, with my parents at that time where like as long as I like finished college and didn't just focus solely on playing poker, like I could have some time to explore it myself. And then unfortunately, like the game dried up, and my parents probably ended up thinking they were right, or very much being right in the idea that it maybe wasn't like a long-term career path for me. So then I did end up getting like a normal type finance job at a bank, doing some stuff that I would say is like kind of in the realm of like business analytics, but it was more I actually kind of gravitated more towards like this like report writing and doing certain sorts of things in like a SQL database and like extracting information from that. And I didn't have like any real programming experience at that point, so I had to kind of learn, I would say, SQL in doing that, which I do think was very helpful for where my skill set lies now. But yeah, that was the path that I took. So then I was kind of working in the banking setting, the banking world, and was still very much interested in like sports betting and football and DFS and all these things. So I did end up kind of around like 2012, 2013. I ended up like, building basically like a blog or site with one of my friends. And we just kind of started like doing like DFS type articles and projections and things like that. And I think that was kind of my first, I would say, foray really into like, sports analytics and doing more consumer facing type work for people that were interested in, DFS and daily fantasy sports and those sorts of things.
So what was the name of the site?
So it was DFS Report, it was called. So we started basically in like 2013. And it was kind of early on. We had, my business partner at the time and I were, very much, had come up once again through like the poker streets, and were very interested in, various approaches to taking advantage of like bonuses that sites would offer and things like that. So we tried our hand at a few different things and then thought, there's not a ton of, I would say there wasn't a ton of like competition from a content perspective for daily fantasy sports specifically at that time. I think, the one major site was Roto Grinders. So we kind of had this vision of being somewhat of like a news type site while also providing, like various plays and those sorts of things to people. So we ran that kind of from like 2013 to 2016. And then we did end up kind of basically selling that site to it ended up going under the Katana Media umbrella and is now like Play Picks, I think they kind of rebranded as after we sold them. But yeah, it was an interesting experience, and it's difficult to be the everything for a site or whatever, especially when you're doing it, kind of really heavily on your own, right? Like you have to be, this SEO type guru. You have to keep everything afloat. You're probably doing some of the writing, the modeling, and everything else, and it's like. And it was a lot. And even with like a business partner, we kind of just ran out of time and everything else. So we did end up selling. And that was kind of when, that 2016, 2017 period was basically when I, at least started initially working with PFF in like a part-time capacity, basically.
Were you working on the site full time, or was it still kind of a side hustle?
It was still very much like a side hustle, yeah. So I was still very much doing like the reporting, SQL database type stuff and everything else. And I think obviously the two worlds didn't really connect in a lot of ways. But now what I'm doing, at least as far as like databases and SQL and everything else, I think it very much at least helped me lay the foundation for being better at, I would say programming in R and Python and these sorts of things that I now use basically on a daily basis. So even though I wasn't doing like the football analytics at my day-to-day job, the foundation, I would say very much, helped me continue to kind of broaden my skill set, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's really great. You mentioned that I run my own site, and that's right. And all the frustrations that you mentioned, I think about kind of on a daily basis. It's a lot to do when you're trying to run the site and you're trying to run the analytics, and it's a lot. And
embed and everything else, right?
Yeah, trying to
keep up with everything else. It's like it's a lot, and like and it is like if I would not have done the site or anything, like I would not have had the opportunities that I do now. And I definitely think it worked out. But yeah, it is a grind to do, the side hustle on top of, the day-to-day stuff and everything else. And like realistically, like where I'm at now, married with kids and stuff like that, like I would not be able to kind of do those same things that I was doing, back when I was kind of single or newly married with a very understanding wife, I would say. So,
yeah, for sure. I was just going to say, like running your own site, you end up running like your own code. And so because of that, I've never had to mess with SQL. I don't think I've ever written a SQL command in my life. So if that ever changes, I'll be sure to bug you about how to do that, since you're my go-to expert now.
I love it. I definitely. So
awesome. So in the more recent years, you started working with PFF. When did you end up going over there full time with your work?
Yeah, so it was 2020, basically right around like the COVID types stuff. It was a little bit delayed, but yeah, I was doing a lot of contract writing, and a lot of and a lot of work alongside Eric Eager. I think he went full time, I want to say 2018 or 2019 or something like that. So I was doing a lot of like the sports betting content, while also kind of helping him develop some of the initial frameworks for the betting models alongside him and George Shahiri. So it was good. It wasn't full time up until 2020 basically, but it was I was very much bought into the direction that PFF was going, I would say.
Absolutely. And then PFF over the course of the offseason really made a push to get into the betting space. And then, of course, Dr. Eric Eager leaves for another job. And obviously, we wish him well. But explain how your role has changed and kind of what you do on a day to day level every day at PFF now.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, it's very much, I would say, different between the off season and in season, right? Like I think off season I very much spend the majority of my days coding or trying to develop new either approaches or new models or new ways that we can potentially try and beat some of the ever evolving sports betting markets. So one of the big things we worked on this off season, and we're kind of continuing to iterate on, is something that I'm really excited about, is kind of this like play by play simulation, which starts at the play level, like a typical NFL game would with the kickoff, and then it essentially simulates out every single play in a particular game. Has models for all sorts of different things folded into that, and it essentially kind of spits out 10,000 simulations of any game that we kind of want to run, and we get I would say a pretty cool and unique distribution of not only game level outcomes but player level outcomes, and it does give us like a lot of opportunities to price markets and things that we are not offering right now. So like one of the big ones that everyone wants to bet is anytime touchdowns. Well, this model can very much tell us how often someone is projected to score based on 10,000 simulations, and it can tell us how often a defensive player is capable of getting a sack and doing that. So that was my big project in the off season. Still, like I said, I'm still actively working with our engineering team and everybody else to get that into a production ready state. Kind of on a daily basis. And then on top of that, the process is, for me to load or kind of like train and deploy, various like models that we use on a weekly basis for our current models. So like, PFF Greenline, for example, we try and predict, against the spread, total, and money line for both NFL and college football. Like we do, every single week we do a little bit of a training process through AWS, and I'm responsible for deploying that, getting that ready, making sure everything looks correctly from a data perspective, and then getting that into consumers' hands as quickly as possible. So that's one thing we do. We also have some responsibility over like the fantasy projections, like the mismatches type stuff and everything else as well. So a lot of like the tools based things that PFF offers takes some sort of initial jumping off point each week from me or people on my team, I would say.
Nice. And with that play by play simulation, you're going to be able to get distributions, right? So not just average number of touchdowns. You're going to be able to get distributions, which are going to look weird, and that's probably pretty useful, whether you're betting the outcome of games or player props or whatnot.
Yep. Yeah. And so we can have, like the play by play output. We can also, aggregate it at the game level as well to see like, oh, this, in 60% of our games, Jamar Chase scores, a touchdown this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. So the distributions I think is one of the very exciting parts of it. The other thing is like kind of understanding the story or narrative that needs to happen for certain outcomes, I would say, right? So if Jamar Chase, scores a touchdown in this game, how often do the Bengals win? And how often do we do, how often do these other things win? And how often does T. Higgins, see 6 targets when Jamar Chase scores a touchdown? Like all those things, we can kind of answer now. And I do think that, trying to at least somewhat get ahead of the curve in where the betting market is going from, like a same game parlay perspective and being able to price out those events, successfully, is very much, I would say, the goal, as well as just like, as well as just like hoping to be, better and improved on, predicting game spreads and totals and everything else.
So the play-by-play simulation is part of the tools available at PFF now?
So basically the goal is to transition like the underlining things from from Greenline to basically this new play-by-play simulation. There is there's some like engineering type things that are still very much in the works. I would say that from my perspective, like I can code things, but I may not have done it in the best or the most efficient manner, so it is probably a little bit too slow to be, production ready right now. And that's kind of the thing that we're iterating on. But we have been, I would say tracking results against the betting market for what our simulation's predicting. And I think that, initially through, the first 12 weeks of the season, it's been very encouraging from that perspective. So I think the push is to get it, into a production state, I would say, as quickly as possible.
Very nice. So Ben, you've already talked a little bit about this with your work at PFF, but give me a sense for your handicapping process. Give me like the sources of data and analytics that you use, and then maybe how that differs between college football and the NFL.
Right. Yeah. And so I would say it is, kind of ever evolving. I am, I would say very much a company man. I do use PFF data, like I would say kind of outside of the situational things that are folded into most models, like, rest differentials, travel, those sorts of things. Like we are very much, I would say, kind of relying on PFF grades to give us a somewhat accurate view of not only, the players, but the facets and the unit facets for how well these teams have performed in an opponent adjusted type setting. So those are the types of things I look at. I do, I'm very heavily model based sports better, just because, if we're trying to bet, NFL and college football and everything else, like there is very much like a time element to it. And I do think that, that is one of the big benefits of doing the modeling work, and also, understanding what goes into the models, is that, it kind of like raises the level in which you kind of first need to dig into the data, right? Because if you understand what the model's already taken into account, then you're kind of looking for, other factors that might be influencing the spread that you're maybe not taking into account. And from there, you can kind of, go digging and see if there's something that either you're missing or maybe the betting market is missing. And that's kind of, the approach I've taken. So I definitely don't, I would say, blindly bet our models or bet every single, play that we put out there. But I very much use it as a basis to kind of filter out options from my own personal betting, every single week.
So when you say model, does that mean what the output of Greenline is now, or is that more the play-by-play simulation that you've been telling us, or is there some other model that you're using?
Yeah, so it would be the Greenline model. I rely on that heavily, but yeah, once again, like we are running the play-by-play simulation behind the scenes, so I am actively kind of betting certain things that's outputting as well, and then an understanding kind of where that has been in our accuracy testings, and how where it's been accurate versus where it's been I would say behind the betting market in a lot of ways. Obviously taking that into account as well, but the goal is kind of to be able to kind of compare both sides of it, be able to compare where Greenline sits, be able to kind of compare where play-by-play simulation sits, and then kind of trying to understand, like, if there is an edge in one or both of these situations, like, why is that? What is PFF seeing that maybe the betting market isn't? And then from there, that's the spot where I'm either definitely going to bet it or maybe taking more of like a wait and see approach on it.
For sure. So Greenline, the primary data input is the PFF grades. Is that right?
Yep. So we have, obviously the 0 to 100 PFF grades that we have on the site, and it's, comes with a premium subscription. We also do, some more options behind the scenes, I would say, to kind of like distill out the play-by-play grading scale in a slightly different manner, and fold in some, opponent adjusted strength type metrics as well. And those are the ones that we kind of use in the model. So we have like a passing opponent adjusted grade that we kind of fold into the model. We have a rushing one, we have, a receiving one, pass rush coverage, all of those facets basically. And we kind of take that and we take, where we are currently ranking these teams, and then folding in a lot of like the situational aspects of it, folding in, a couple other power rankings metrics like our ELO model, and those sorts of things. And then basically trying to predict, where do we fall in relation to the betting market. So I think, and it is an interesting discussion, because I think, so much of what has dominated the headlines from, an NFL betting perspective has been teams that are assumed to be lucky or whatever, right? I think, specifically an example right now is like the Minnesota Vikings. Like they've gotten a few lucky plays that have broken in their direction, and they're probably a few. Maybe, I mean, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, so I might be a little biased, but like they've gotten a few things, and it was, kind of the New York Giants were the start of that, right? Like they were very much a team that was outperforming what their underlying metrics kind of were. And there's various approaches to doing that. And I think some are relatively sound, and some are a little bit more of, a gray area or something that I wouldn't probably necessarily want to touch. But one thing that we arrive at with, I would say our opponent adjusted grades from PFF's play-by-play data is kind of a contextualized idea of how well that team actually did outside of just, the box score stats. So that's why I think, that specifically does have quite a bit of value, and is very much, I would say, a core piece of, our green line metrics, but also now our play-by-play simulation as well.
Absolutely. The Vikings are pretty interesting. I did a pretty deep dive for a patron-only episode for patrons that support this podcast. And I think everyone saw the Hunter Henry catch that kind of clearly was a catch and somehow got overturned, turning a touchdown into a field goal.
I don't want to get in trouble here, and I know I'm definitely in the minority on this. I think there was, and not to derail everything, but to me, like the ball, like his hand wasn't under the ball when it moved. So the argument is like, when is it a catch? When it's a catch in the end zone or something, kind of seems to be, like the hang up or whatever. And yeah, maybe that one did definitely break correctly for the Vikings. I think the other side of it, or the other part of it, was like, to me, the Vikings were dinged pretty significantly for having a return touchdown, and whether there was like a block in the back, in that situation or not, it was maybe a missed call. But the thing that I think, a lot of the underlying metrics are kind of missing when they're trying to adjust for some of those plays, is that the Patriots had, I would say, a very successful kick return as well, and ended up scoring on that drive. And so if Ngakoue basically gets tackled at the 50-yard line as opposed to bringing that into the end zone, like what do these sort of adjusted scores kind of look like in that scenario, right? Especially if the Vikings end up scoring on that particular drive. Then, so I think there is definitely added elements of luck, but I also think some of these metrics that are being developed group a lot more into like the luck bin than maybe what's actually happening. I don't know, because I think, specifically from my not necessarily understanding, but just like how I think about football, like I think in some ways like the coaching aspect for special teams play is more prevalent than in maybe any other facet of play. Like I think like coaches can influence big plays from special teams more so than they maybe not necessarily do every single play from a like a passing or running perspective. But I think that, good kick returns should reflect positively on a coach that designed that well. And I think, punt returns, same thing, even, the some of the components of like trick plays and stuff like that. Like, I think there's like maybe an element of special teams play that very much gets bucketed into a luck category that should probably maybe be more a reflection on, quality coaching from my perspective.
For sure. I mean, that would be an interesting thing to study. You're always going to be limited because of the very few number of special teams plays, right? So that's going to be a pain in the rear end. But I mean, I don't know, maybe someone's done this, but it would be interesting to break up special teams into, a return that's a success versus a return that's explosive, right? And I've done some work, success rate is particularly more sticky than, something like yards per pass attempt. Right. And I think some of the explosiveness is, randomness certainly plays a big role in that. And I think that's, it certainly could be that, you're ascribing too much luck to like a return, like the Vikings had. And obviously like New England had one the week before that obviously changed the game against the Jets. Right. So yeah, I don't know if, maybe it sounds like some good work for the offseason, right? But I don't know. I mean, with a 16 game season, like there's only so many kick returns. So
and there's
I
only
would be
so many, and there's far fewer successful kick returns or whatever too, right? Is
well,
also the hang up as well. But
no, but I mean, I think my idea, if I wanted to define success on a kickoff, like I would just look at all kickoffs and I would take kind of the median result. And then I would bucket them into like, 50-50 success, not success. Right. That seems like the way to do it. And then when you can look at the successful ones, I mean, some of those are just going to be explosive and there's going to be a random element there, but then we can maybe ask, how random is it?
Right.
Because on the team level, explosive plays, like explosiveness on successful plays looks completely random in college and basically almost random in NFL, but not quite. But it seems like there's a little signal, and it's kind of an incomplete analysis because that's only on the team level. You should really dig down onto the player level because you probably do have enough data there. But then when you're asking about special teams, sample size again becomes an issue, and so.
Yeah. And it's very hard to assign, responsibility, I would say, in some ways for individual special teams players and stuff, as well too is very tricky. So, but that's the great thing about being involved in, football analytics and everything else is there's always new questions and the game is always evolving, but it's never going to be, in some ways fully solved or whatever. And I think that just kind of adds to the intrigue of it all, right? Or the enjoyment of it all is, constantly trying to improve, in small increments and kind of seeing where you're at, in comparison and judging the accuracy and everything else is, very much, I would say, the exciting part of working in football analytics for sure.
Absolutely. Ben, is there a college football or NFL bet that you'd be willing to share?
I know we want to do college. I do think that
we can do NFL.
I think the North Carolina Tar Heels are kind of live this weekend against Clemson. Just a team that, outside of like Will Shipley, rushing the football, like I don't think they're very good offensively. I do kind of buy into, the Drake May hype quite a bit. So I think, with the better quarterback in this matchup, getting 7.5 points, I like them against the spread. I also like them, on the money line here. We have these teams probably a little bit closer than what betting markets currently rank right now. So I think North Carolina's, one of my favorite college football bets this week. And what do you think of that particular matchup? Because Clemson's a team that I have kind of been fading, all year. I did get some back on the South Carolina, win last weekend, but maybe there's a reason why I'm undervaluing them a little bit, but I haven't quite found that yet. And I'd be curious what you're seeing from their perspective and if North Carolina can maybe pull off a victory here on Saturday.
I think at the beginning of the season, I was really dug into Clemson and they looked kind of bad. And we were asking a lot of questions about how good they were. I think they kind of got better and they had, that nice streak of wins. And then I feel like they maybe dropped off a little bit. I'm kind of looking at some of my numbers right now. The pass offense is 54th when I look at success rate adjusted for strength of schedule. I mean, that's not good, right? Like that's not
right.
Clemson good. You recruited a very highly sought after quarterback. That's bad. Defense, they weren't looking good for a while. It looked like they've leveled out at like 30th when I look at adjusted success rate, which I also think has to be a failure given that you have 2 first-round picks on that defensive line and just the tradition associated with that program. So
right.
Yeah.
That's the frustrating thing for me with Clemson is like they very much have not been better than the sum of their parts individually, it seems like, right? And that is probably a reflection in some ways on the coaching staff, but they continue to get highly sought after recruits, 5-star recruits and everything else. And they just don't seem to, I would say, measure up, especially if they don't have, Trevor Lawrence at the quarterback position to really, some of the best teams in college football. So it's weird. I don't know. We have their defense 11th overall, which kind of like you said is definitely respectable, but given the talent on that side of the football specifically, like I think that's got to be a disappointment here in 2022.
You said the spread was Clemson -7 in this game. I'm looking at
I'm seeing 7.5 in some spots.
Clemson 7.5, yeah.
7.5. So I like the Tar Heels here.
So Ben, we have made it to the conference championship week of college football. we have 4 top teams in the college football playoff rankings: Georgia, Michigan, TCU, USC. Do you see any of these teams susceptible to an upset? And do you have any other thoughts on their playoff hopes?
Yeah, I know last time we talked on, the Covering the Spread podcast with Jim Sanis, like it was kind of right before this stretch run for TCU. I think they were like plus 500, plus 550 to get into the college football playoffs. And at that time, we kind of talked about, if you do like TCU, maybe a better approach was kind of like rolling in some money line bets, especially if you think they'd be a decent dog against Texas. And that obviously worked out really well. And they got through Texas Tech, and they got through Texas and Baylor and Iowa State, and have looked pretty good doing it, I would say. But I still think, out of the 4 teams that you mentioned, very much I would say I'm concerned about TCU. And I think it kind of goes back to, the game that they played against Kansas State earlier on in the season, right? I think TCU was down 11 points at halftime, was getting absolutely, gashed on the ground. I think they had something like 4.8, 4.7 yards per carry before contact in the first half allowed, 4 explosive plays. So they definitely turned it around in the second half, but I think, the framework is in place for Kansas State to beat them. And I very much think, TCU hasn't been all that great from a run defense perspective, from PFF's grading standpoint. So I'm concerned about them, actually getting in. And then the question becomes, if they do lose, like, should they still get into the college football playoff or not? And I'm not. And I'm not quite sure if they, I'm not quite sure if they're going to be honest with you.
I'm not sure the committee knows what they would do.
Right, that's true.
If TCU loses, right? Because they're on the fence, and obviously it depends on what happens to USC. And TCU certainly benefits from the poor way in which Ohio State lost last week.
Right,
but if you look over the course of the season, Ohio State has pretty good argument, and this is kind of the funniest thing ever that I've become this like Ohio State apologist this week. No, not fan, not a fan living here in Ann Arbor, but I purposely tweeted out that like I would still make Ohio State a 2.5 point favorite over Michigan in a neutral site game, and I gave my reasons. Explosive plays, like we've talked about, tend to be random, and Michigan really benefited from that. And honestly, that was very unexpected from my perspective. Like, if you would have told me that Ohio State stacks the box and challenges Michigan's wide receivers to break explosive plays, I would have told you that was a pretty good strategy before the game. Now, clearly, I was wrong, and I'm happy about that. But anyway, I'm usually not on Twitter too much, but like I tweeted that out to provoke some people, mostly people that. I tweeted it out to provoke some people, and it did. Yeah. So that was kind of fun.
You got the response. Yeah, Twitter is an interesting place, I would say, especially right now. But I'm in agreement with you, and it's hard because we run like a season long simulation as well that we do have in production,
right?
And we still very much like Ohio State to get in the college football playoffs, and I think that part of it. Is that they were so good at the beginning of the season, and their power ranking is still so strong that it seems like if TCU or USC loses, that they should probably get in, right? I think USC is probably going to handle business this weekend and get in. So, the question for me is TCU and what will the committee do? And it's, it's a difficult thing to handicap, I would say, because you're trying to, you're trying to kind of project out what the committee feels about in these certain situations. But I think the emphasis has very much previously been on conference championship winners. So if TCU doesn't do that, I think there's a strong case to be made for Ohio State maybe getting in, especially if Michigan, I would say runs up the score this weekend against Purdue.
Yeah, for sure. Which is something that could happen. I don't know. I mean, there have to be betting markets on the chance that TCU makes the playoff, right? And I don't know if there's a specific market in which you can bet on whether TCU makes it, after losing to Kansas State. But it'd be interesting to look at. I think you're right. It is going to be an interesting game. Deuce Vaughn for Kansas State, the running back, is a load, and they're going to need to tackle that guy. And it should be a good game. I mean, TCU last time I checked was a 2.5 point favorite. Definitely the smallest there. Ben, let's move on to the NFL. we have Green Bay at Chicago, and this is a pretty interesting game because there's a lot of uncertainty about the health status of both quarterbacks. There's also a lot of uncertainty about Green Bay in general, who've had a really bad season. What are you seeing in this game?
Yeah, I mean the I would say the spread movement off the open has been really interesting to me, right? I think it was kind of Green Bay -2.5. It's now up to -4. I did think that we kind of got some positive news on Justin Fields yesterday, which I thought was maybe going to move the needle, at least not in the direction of Green Bay. But, obviously Aaron Rodgers coming out and saying that he's going to play in this game, still very much thinks he can own the Bears, kind of a revenge game, maybe Rodgers' last stand or something else. But, I'm concerned about, the Bears specifically with, Darnell Mooney obviously is going to be out. I think Chase Claypool as well was a little banged up coming out of week 12. So the wide receiver unit, even with Fields in the fold, it is very concerning. So it's going to have to be Justin Fields kind of running all over the football field against the Packers defense that was very inadequate, I would say, at stopping, a mobile quarterback last week. So maybe we see that play out, but I think I missed the best of the number with Green Bay, but I still think given the questionable nature of Justin Fields and what we saw from, Jordan Love last week, if he does start, or Aaron Rodgers as well, I think the Packers are probably the correct side for me in this matchup.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, the Packers are kind of getting a little bit healthier at the skill position as well. Yeah. Did put up points didn't win against Philadelphia, but put up some points. And, my efficiency numbers have kind of liked the Packers all year, but that certainly hasn't translated onto the scoreboard. There's been a ton of reasons as to why, but, can they finally, stop making mistakes in the red zone like they did against Detroit and, kind of finish off some drives, right? So, yeah. I mean, my numbers, I haven't bet this yet, but my numbers do like Green Bay here. I have them. Yeah, I definitely have them side with my member numbers. So it is good to see that you agree with that.
Let's see it from Rodgers one more time, I would say, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm excited for it. So
yeah, absolutely. Ben, Kansas City travels to Cincinnati to try to avenge last year's AFC Championship game. I think this is a pretty interesting game of two prime contenders in the AFC. What are you seeing with this game?
Yeah, I mean, this is the stretch for the Bengals, right? I think they, have by far the most difficult remaining schedule, of any team in the NFL. Just went toe-to-toe with the best rushing attack last week in the Tennessee Titans. And now, very much, I would say, face off against the best passing attack. And I think that's kind of not necessarily like a difficult block or hurdle to overcome, but it's definitely something that matters, right? Because they were very successful slowing down Derrick Henry, especially in the trenches. Now they kind of have, the complete opposite task of trying to slow down, Patrick Mahomes through the air and are very much missing, their best coverage cornerback in Chidobe Awuzie. I think that, Cam Taylor-Britt, rookie, kind of filling in for him is going to be the spot that breaks down, right? I think from, PFF's perspective, since Cam Taylor-Britt came back, from injury and kind of started playing, he has the 10th highest receiving yards allowed per coverage snap. So has been, very susceptible to chunk plays. And we've seen Mahomes and we've seen Andy Reid, be able to take advantage of these mismatches in the secondary any chance that they can get. So I think Taylor-Britt gets picked on a little bit. I think that, there's a little bit of, the chip on both Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid's shoulders. So I do think we're going to see, really quality performances from both of those. The question with the Chiefs is always, what is Andy Reid going to kind of call the good plays? That's Eric Eager's, philosophy on them. If he could figure out when Reid was going to call the good plays, he'd be a millionaire from, a sports betting perspective. But I very much think we're going to get, the best effort from the Chiefs this weekend. So even with, Jamar Chase kind of back and in the fold, I like Chiefs at the reduced number. I know it's moved in the Bengals direction here a little bit, but I think they're gonna, and I think they're capable of winning a shootout game here. So I like the Chiefs -1.5, -2. I think they're going to be able to get it done here in Cincinnati.
Interesting. I mean, I do think it's interesting that, I think Cincinnati's had a great year. They look good by a lot of the metrics that I've been looking at. I would definitely put them as, a contender with Kansas City and Buffalo to make the Super Bowl. Kansas City being favored on the road means that they're, 4-5 points better on a neutral field.
Right.
And that seems like a lot to me. I don't know what your metrics would say about that.
Yeah,
I guess I suggest otherwise, but
so we do like Kansas City, in this spot from Greenline's perspective. We actually have, it just based on like our conversion from our power rankings metrics to, against the spread, we have Kansas City 9.3 points better than an average team, and we have Cincinnati at 4.1. So,
okay.
So you do have the spread differential of 5.2. Basically, that's kind of exactly where you're at in a lot of ways. So, we definitely I would say value Patrick Mahomes very highly, and some of the the other key underlying metrics. But I agree with you. Like, Cincinnati has been a team that I was on basically all season. I was on them last week against Tennessee. And I would say, the one knock for them was kind of going to be the difficult strength of schedule. And this is kind of the stretch where if they are going to have some struggles, it's going to be here. But they are still, I would say, very much a team that, I'm going to be buying into, in the playoffs. And I do think they could easily go toe to toe with both Buffalo and Kansas City when it's all said and done. And we've seen them kind of do that before already. So, but I think, for this particular one, regular season, all things considered, I'm going to back Kansas City, I would say, in this spot.
Yeah, I do think you make a good point that Kansas City is going to pick on that secondary. When Awuzie went down, the cornerback, they've played some really poor pass offenses since then.
Right.
And it obviously changes when you face Kansas City, and I've been pretty impressed, at least numbers-wise, with what Kansas City is doing. You lose Tyreek Hill, you expect it to go down, but they're still first in the NFL. When I look at passing success rate adjusted for opponent, just seems like Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes know what to do, and it seems like they have a long-term plan as well.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the one where, we kind of see Mahomes unleashed a little bit. I think he kind of pushes away, in the MVP race and discussion and everything else. And I think this is, probably setting up as kind of that signature, win for Kansas City in route to maybe, I would say solidifying the number one overall seed and everything else. So,
absolutely. Ben, I'd like to ask some potentially non-sports questions to end the show. What's your favorite book?
Yeah, so this is I am so boring. I do feel like I do enjoy reading, and it is like the way that I learn. So I do a ton of like nonfiction type reading is like basically where I've been at for like the past 10 years. But I do think, even like growing up and everything else, one of the books that I enjoyed the most, outside of like learning perspective books was Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. Nice. I don't know. It was the humor and everything else, even like in like the dire situations, I thought was just like so well done. And I actually was kind of like, really, I would say probably like developed my love of reading in a lot of ways. So I do love Slaughterhouse-Five. I do think there are, some books specific to sports betting that I've found great value. And I know I mentioned, Sharp Sports Betting as well. I think as, a foundation, obviously, some of the stuff is very outdated, but even in like a how to think approach from sports betting, I found that book really valuable. I think Logic of Sports Betting as well, very much has been, I would say like the new age version of Sharp Sports Betting. And I think that it has, a ton of value for anybody that is, kind of looking at learning more about sports betting. So those are two books I would recommend from that perspective. I am currently reading a book called The Man Who Solved the Market. It's kind of like more of like a modeling based or modeling idea or approach type book. I haven't gotten fully, all the way into it or even halfway through it, but it's also another one that I think I'm going to enjoy quite a bit as well. So those would be, some of my recommendations, for favorite books, I would say.
That's awesome. I completely love Slaughterhouse-Five. I think it's hilarious. And it's such an easy read. I think you get this credit for reading Vonnegut and literature and yada, yada, yada. But it's really an easy read, and it's really hilarious. And it actually made me dig into more Vonnegut.
Yep.
And I read Cat's Cradle, which like I absolutely hated. It's not funny. It's really depressing. Gotten some crap on Twitter for saying that. I absolutely didn't like it. So like there's a lot of other Vonnegut that doesn't really do it for me. And actually really kind of reflects him as a person that is just so different from Slaughterhouse-Five, which is upbeat despite these kind of absurd conditions, you know?
Right. And that was kind of my experience as well, because Slaughterhouse-Five was the first book that I read from Vonnegut, and I did branch out. I honestly don't even think I made it all the way through Cat's Cradle, but I did try like a few other books, and like for the most part, I found a couple of them enjoyable, but I don't know. Slaughterhouse-Five was just very much right up my alley, I would say. I don't know, and it was one of the books that I have read a few different times just to try and pick up on little subtleties that he introduced, I would say.
For sure. I mean, I read Cat's Cradle because he himself said that's the book you should read that he wrote. And then I got through half of it, didn't like it, lost it on a plane. And I was like, oh, that's a sign, right? But for some reason picked it up again and finished it and then hated it even more. So should stop.
So it goes.
So it goes. Exactly. I appreciate the sports betting books that you were talking about. Unabated actually released a pretty cool list of sports betting books, of which both of the ones that you talked about are on that list. The only other one that I would add is some of Chris Andrews' books. I forget if it's Then One Day or Then One Year, but he wrote a book about bookmaking actually right through the pandemic. It's kind of like a history right through the pandemic, which makes it kind of sad too. But it's really interesting to see like how he moves on Super Bowl props, and just his thought process, which is actually very different from how bookmakers or whatever they're calling the people that run these corporate sports books operate.
Some people wouldn't call them bookmakers anymore. It sounds like, that's for sure. But yeah, it is good. Yeah, I've wanted to check out, and I honestly think I bought that book on my Kindle reader. I haven't made it through. I feel like I slacked so much reading in season, but it is like, the one hobby I still enjoy, but I haven't been great at, picking it up and reading for a little bit. Like I'm very much I'd like to read for like 3 hours type of person and then put it down. I'm not like a consistent 30 minutes a night sort of person, I would say. So I go in stretches, unfortunately. But
right. And 3 hours in a sitting is literally impossible during football season.
Right. It is impossible during football season. So,
and then who was the Man Who Solved the Market book that you talked about? Who is that about?
Gregory Zuckerman wrote it. It's about how Jim Simons kind of launched the quant revolution. There's a lot of like stochastic processing and modeling and those sorts of things in there. And some of the work that I've been doing with our play-by-play simulation, George Shahiri actually recommended and bought it for me, just kind of like trying to understand, some of these approaches that were successful from, a stock market perspective and how they might have some application for me. But it's very much also like, a biography about how he arrived at where he did and stuff like that. So I haven't made it all the way through, but it's, it might take me till March, kind of like you said, because of the whole in-season thing. But I have very much enjoyed the parts that I've gotten to, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, Jim Simons, I believe, was a math professor before he embarked on Wall Street.
He was.
He's very successful. I still get emails from like Quanta Magazine, which I think is a publication of the Simons Foundation, which does they do a lot of interesting content on mathematics and computer science and stuff. That's pretty cool. So that is awesome. All right, Ben, how about your best culinary experience?
That is a good question. I would say somewhat boring from a food perspective, but I actually, one thing that I have been developing and is a habit is I actually do really enjoy cooking my own food and stuff like that. So kind of like developing and building out some like more healthy recipes has been kind of my approach for the past couple of seasons. But outside of that, like I love, I love really good steak, crushing, any sort of meat type thing. And I also do, sometimes dabble in like smoking meats and stuff like that. So I love ribs, brisket, all those things. And I kind of like, I don't know, I like taking it more on my own approach and kind of cooking my own food more than going out at this point. So I don't know if I have any one that jumps out to me from that perspective. But if you have any recommendations, I would love to try some, various great food spots out. But I usually when I go on like trips and stuff like that, I very much gravitate towards, the heavy barbecue type places, like going to Austin, Texas, or Nashville, or Kansas City, or those sorts of things are, usually my foodie roadie type endeavors, I would say.
Nice. How do you cook your steak when you make it at home?
I do medium rare. My wife likes it like medium well, so it's very much a balancing act between the two. But yeah, I've tried a few different approaches. I think like the reverse sear is probably the most popular at home thing. I have tried a few different ways. I have kind of like even dabbled a little bit in like doing it on like the smoker, basically, if you do have a smoker that gets hot enough to do it. But that gives a kind of a more weird smoky type taste to the steak, which I'm not sure I'm overly fond of, I would say.
What's the reverse sear?
So that's basically you do like you sear it over like a really hot pan right away, and then put it in like an oven or something like that for a little bit of time. So
you can do that with like the cast iron pot, right? Yep, so you get a good sear, and then you get the temperature in the middle to wherever you want it.
Exactly. So I think that's like the easiest way to do it at home. But yeah, I mean, obviously the grilling and everything else, do that when the weather allows in the Midwest, I would say. So
yeah, my most favorite culinary adventure in my kitchen has been this roast chicken with warm bread salad. So it's a Zuni Cafe recipe, which is like this super famous place in San Francisco. And my wife and I went and had the roast chicken with warm bread salad, and I thought it was like one of the best things I'd ever eaten. And then I was, during the off season, I kind of get into cooking and trying new things, and I looked up some recipes. But the reason it's so good, you essentially like cut up the bread, and you put the bread, and then you put the chicken on top of the bread, and you roast the chicken on top of the bread. So you're essentially getting the world's best croutons.
Right. Which I do love croutons.
So like you could go look up the recipe and kind of go do the full thing. But like if you just take a chicken, you like, I think it's called spatchcocking. You take out the spine, you open it up, cut up some bread, just put the chicken on top of the bread, and cook it until the chicken is at the right internal temperature. And then, you can kind of do whatever you want with the salad, just to put some greens on. I mean, I make my own dressing because I like to, but yeah, it's kind of funny. My wife was like, yeah, I didn't like that at Zuni Cafe, but I like it when you make it.
Right. Like, yeah, thanks. You're one step up. That's good. I might need to have you send me the recipe. I would definitely try that out for sure.
Yeah, so. I can definitely send. If you actually just search roast chicken with bread salad from Zuni Cafe on YouTube, like there's a pretty good 5-minute one. I'll try to find it. I'll throw it in it in the show notes on the site here. But yeah, it's a good one. It's that's been my most fun. All right, Ben, if you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh man, this is a good question. I don't know. I think there's like a few different options, because it probably would depend somewhat on my mood, and like if I was interested in it from an educational perspective, or just like an enjoyment perspective, or wanted to learn or something like that. But I think if I was just like, and this is going to sound really weird, but I think if I was just like looking from an enjoyment perspective, a guy that grew up in my hometown and that I always followed and is no longer with us, basically, but Mitch Hedberg, comedian. I feel like that would be like the most enjoyable evening experience I could ever have. So he would maybe be an option, but I think there's a lot of obviously much better choices from an educational perspective, whether you want to learn from sports betting and someone kind of like the founding fathers of who kind of built up the industry, or even just like from a historical perspective as well. So I don't know, I'd be curious to hear your options on this one, Ed.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I'll tell you in a sec, but tell me more about Mitch Hedberg. I've never heard of this comedian.
Oh, he's a comedian. He's kind of like this, like, hippie-ish type comedian from Minnesota. He actually did die. I want to say it was a long time ago, but he has these like just weird one-liners, and he's like pretty far out there. But I've always enjoyed his humor for a lot of things. So maybe he would be, the option if I needed a good laugh or something like that, because I've always enjoyed his comedy. But I think I was hoping to go a little bit more outside of the box and not say somebody like Abraham Lincoln or Gandhi or something like that, just to give people a little bit more down to earth approach. I don't know, but
no, I like the answers like Mitch Hedberg, because it's someone I've never heard of. Get to ask you about him, and I would argue maybe it's educational, because talking to a comedian might help you make better content.
Right. Very much so. That's very true. And then I don't know why I'm like blinking on his name right now. And I know it's like it starts BB or whatever, but the guy who kind of solved like pari-mutuel horse racing, basically.
Bill Bentner.
Bill Bentner. Yeah. I feel like that would be a really interesting dinner experience to have as well, and just like understanding kind of what his approach was, because I've obviously never done anything in like the pari-mutuel or anything, but even just like his approach and understanding and quantifying an edge and being able to kind of execute on everything that it took to essentially control the market, I think would be one of the better experiences from my background for sure. So
Spanky talks about Bill Bentner with sheer deity-like reverence. It's pretty interesting. And I wouldn't be surprised if Bill Bentner showed up at the next Bet Bash. I think there's
I'm gonna have to book my ticket. Then you're saying, okay?
Yeah, no, I need to buy my ticket too. I think the Spanky discount is probably gone, and I'm gonna end up paying extra money. But you should go to Bet Bash, because it's awesome, and obviously in your line of work, it's good. And all right, so who would I have dinner with? So my answer last time I truly thought about this was Thomas Pynchon. He's a writer that's written Gravity's Rainbow, which is a super famous book. His best book is, oh my God, I can't even think of the name. It's the huge, thick one that was published within the last 20 years. This is embarrassing. Anyway, Thomas Pynchon is...
Vice?
No, so that's a short one. That's Against the Day. Yeah, Against the Day is... Yeah, I'm just gonna say it's my favorite book ever. It's like I'm gonna
buy that book. I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna read it in March. Then I like that recommendation.
Awesome. I think it. Yeah, I don't know. You kind of have to get used to Pynchon a little bit, but it's easier to get used to it with Against the Day. And I gotta warn you, like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I didn't really like the book at page 300 out of 1100, and I only kind of continued to read it because I like Pynchon and I like Gravity's Rainbow. And then it just became the best thing ever. And I think Pynchon would be an interesting person to talk to, because he's such a recluse, right? He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't allow people to take pictures of him. He's
very private.
He's very private, right? And I just think it'd be interesting, right? I mean, there's a lot of other authors out there that there's just, you listen to podcasts and you get to know them pretty well, but you can't do that with Pynchon. And so I would definitely want to have dinner with him, because I think it'd be interesting. And there's just, you can really get a sense for a person from his books. And so, there's just a lot of sex in Gravity's Rainbow, which is something not sex, but like sexual references, which is very different from like Against the Day, which is more character driven and less like it's fun. It's still funny, but not like just like laugh out loud funny,
right?
Sexually, that Gravity's Rainbow is. Yeah, it's way more subtle. So it would just be interesting to kind of talk to him and how that evolved. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? If you're in your 20s, you're kind of a little more wound up sexually than later in your life, right?
Right.
So
definitely are. It sounds like I got 2 books to read come March, but I think Against the Day might take me until next football season. We'll see how long.
Yeah, I mean that's one of those ones where you want to get into that. You want to get into that 30-minute a day habit, or that's a really tough one to finish.
Although in a couple settings, right?
I mean, Gravity's Rainbow is a harder read, so that Anyways, if love both of them. So Ben Brown,
I'm going to check
so
him
much.
out. I'm going to check him out.
Awesome. Ben Brown, thank you so much for your time today talking about football and so many other things. Please let everyone know where they can find you on the internet and otherwise.
Yeah, kind of like you said, I do go to Twitter once in a while, probably not as much as I should, but you can find me at PFF_Ben Brown. My DMs are, wide open if anybody wants to, chat or hear about anything or even has, any feedback. Definitely would love to hear it. So you can follow me on Twitter. I am trying to get with the kids in some TikTok videos as well once in a while. Same handle and everything else. So nice. Yeah, occasionally I get some support from our video editing team. So that's when I make some of those TikTok magic videos happen, which is a new foray into me. But yeah, kind of like you, Ed. I mean, social media is an interesting place. You obviously got to take it for what it is, but it's a spot that I probably don't frequent as much as I should, unfortunately. So,
right, but should you?
Right, that's
should you do like all the deep work that you're obviously doing over at PFF, developing these models, and I think you write at least once a week on the NFL. And you're betting. So, I enjoy Twitter. I'm obviously on there, but I certainly think there's times where I'm like, is this person on Twitter too much? Right. Like, what is the world missing? You know what I mean?
There's very much people on Twitter too much. It is a good place to like, not necessarily like crowdsource ideas, but like get different perspectives on things that I also think like kind of helps like solidify directions that you should go from a research perspective and stuff like that. It is something that I have found quite a bit valuable with Twitter specifically, and just getting feedback and stuff I think is great. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe we can do a little bit more foray into it together or something like that. So
no, that would be fun. I think we should find some projects to work together in the off season, because I've definitely been thinking about how, I don't know if it makes sense during the season, but during the off season, working on models, getting some visualizations out there, getting some preliminary results, and getting some feedback, because I think that could be really good, right? I mean, during the season, people don't need more football necessarily. Maybe they do, but come May, people could be a little starved for football, so that'd be fun. Yeah.
Right. They crave it. No, I like that. So, well, I definitely appreciate you having me on, Ed. This has been a very enjoyable discussion for sure.
Thank you so much for coming on, Ben.
My name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Ben Brown. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. Go check that out at thepowerrank.com. This podcast, the Football Analytics Show, is also sponsored by listeners like you. This is done through Patreon. At the $5 per month level, you get my sincere thanks and also a patron-only episode every month. If you decide to support the podcast, right now there's an episode available about 3 overrated football teams. At the $10 per month level, you get everything at the lower level, but also the Establish the Pass mug when you sign up. This is the same mug that I drink my coffee out of every morning. There's also a third tier if you really want to engage with football analytics. To support the Football Analytics Show, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. I'm honored to be your host for this podcast, the Football Analytics Show, and I'll talk to you again next week.